Welcome all to our channel GTech Fluent. Our today's topic number 12 in Angular 11 video tutorial series is attribute binding into the Angular. In this video, we will discuss and understand another way of one-way binding technique, that is attribute binding, and we will discuss what is mean by the attribute binding, why do we need the attribute binding, and how to use attribute binding with an example. So now let's first understand what is meant by the attribute binding. Attribute binding in Angular helps you set values for attribute directly. It sets the value of an attribute on the host element rather than setting the value of the property in the object that represent DOM into the element. Again, attribute binding is also type of the Angular one-way binding technique. So with the help of attribute binding, you can improve accessibility, style of your application dynamically with the help of attribute binding. And we can manage different multiple CSS classes and the styles simultaneously. So let's understand the attribute binding with an example. So let's switch to the VS Code. So we are in our project which we have created for this video tutorial series. So as of now, we have displayed the student details like full name, first name, age, and the different parameter with the help of different one-way technique. So now let's see, we want to give the header for our table like student details. So for that, we need to add one tag, that is th tag, t head. So let's add one tag here, t head. And here we need to give the name like student details, and here we need to call span our t head, like we need to give the call span for the 5. Now let's save this and run our application. So for the running application, we will use ng-serve dash open. So it will open our application into the browser. So if you see, our call span is working here to giving the student details, but problem here is we have hard coded the call span value. Now we will dynamically apply the call span value to the t head. So let's do that. So for that, let's go to the component. So let's create one property here for the call span. So we will call as a call span, and we will give value call span as a number equal to 5, and we will apply this property to the our t head attribute. As we discussed, there are the multiple way to bind the property. So you may say we can use string interpolation to bind the property. So let's do that and try whether it is working or not. So let's copy this, and for string interpolation we need curly braces and the property, and let's save. See, you will get the error. So once you compile, you will get the error, and if you look at the error, it is saying like the it cannot bind the call span since it is known property of t head. So now let's see, can we bind this property with the help of property binding. So for the property binding, we simply put property into the curly braces and assign the value like single quote. Let's save and see the result. Look, we are getting the same error, like we cannot find the property, means we cannot use the string interpolation and as well as property binding for the applying the attribute for the HTML element. To tell the Angular framework that we are setting an attribute value, so we have to prefix the attribute name with the attribute like at attr dot and the name of the attribute where which property we want to set, and let's assign the value to the call span attribute. Let's save it and see the change. Look, our application is running successfully. Let's see the result into the browser. We are getting the result which we expected. So attribute binding is a one-way binding which we are using, which we bind data into the one direction, like string interpolation, property binding, and attribute binding. So using attribute binding, we can bind data from our component to the view. So that is nothing but the one-way binding. The Angular team recommended use property binding or interpolation whenever possible, and use the attribute binding only when there is a no corresponding element property to be bind. The next video tutorial, we will discuss how to apply the class binding, and we will discuss another technique of one-way binding, that is the class binding. So this is all about the attribute binding with the simple example how to use the attribute binding. So there are the different ways you can implement the attribute binding into your application. So please let us know if you have any question or doubt regarding the attribute binding. We will meet in our next video. Thank you.